Chapter 5, the Integumentary System, Part 2. So, we're leaving the skin and moving on to the hypodermis. Hypodermis, not part of the skin, but it is part of the integumentary system. The hypodermis is deep to the dermis. There are many collagen fibers that stretch between the dermis and the hypodermis to connect those two layers together. And then also from the hypodermis to the underlining tissues, so that we have collagen fibers connecting the dermis to the hypodermis and the hypodermis to underlining tissues. The epidermis has large blood vessels and nerves passing through it, going to or from the dermis. And the main tissue in the hypodermis is adipose tissue, is the fatty tissue. So adipose tissue is involved in storage of fat, storage of energy reserves, and also allows for insulation to reduce the loss of heat from the body, and also shock absorber, so that when you bump into something, it's a little less likely to damage structures underneath the hypodermis. All right, well, that was it for the hypodermis. Skin color, as we know, is caused by melanin produced by the melanocytes. The differences in skin color has to do with the amount of melanin being produced. Everyone has about the same number of melanocytes. It's just how active they are that varies. And sometimes their activity can vary in small regions on someone's skin. So freckles and age spots are caused by melanocytes that are a little more active in isolated areas. Again, the darker the skin, the more melanin present, the lower the risk of skin cancer. But then that will block the UV rays, so it makes it more difficult to produce vitamin D. So people with darker skin would want to spend a little more time exposed to the sun in order to produce a sufficient amount of vitamin D. Although vitamin D is now added to so many of the foods we eat that you probably get plenty of it as is. Now a mole is a localized benign overgrowth of a melanocyte. So a mole is basically a benign tumor formed by melanocytes. Skin appendages. Skin appendages are extra things associated with skin. Includes nails, includes hair and hair follicles, includes the sweat glands, eccrine glands, and apocrine glands, and it includes the sebaceous glands or oil glands. There's a hair follicle, sebaceous gland, eccrine gland. Nails. Nails are a modified portion of the epidermis. So nails are made up of keratinocytes. These keratinocytes form hard keratin, giving us this very hard structure that makes up the nail. The nail's cells divide in the nail matrix at the base of the nail, and then the new cells are pushed toward the edge, and then those push more cells, push more cells, push more cells. So very similar to how the epidermis grows. And then the nail plate rests on top of connective tissue forming the nail bed. So the nail plate rests on top of the nail bed. Hair. Hair, as we know, is found all over our bodies. The only places it's not found is the thick skin, the nipples, and certain parts or regions of the genitals. Otherwise, there's at least a tiny fine bit of hair. Hair is also made of keratinocytes, so it's also part of the epidermis. And again, it is the hard keratin that lets the hair be nice and tough. Hair actually has a couple of functions. It has the ability to touch when it is a sensation. So if you can tell when your hair has been touched or moved. So if a mosquito lands on your arm, you're aware of it when the mosquito causes your little fine hairs to move. And hair also has a little bit of a protective function, protects your scalp against sun exposure and heat loss. Eyebrows and eyelashes help to prevent things from getting into the eyes. The hair has two main regions. You have the hair root. The hair root is what's found within the skin. And then the hair shaft. The hair shaft, the part that is outside of the skin. Hair roots are surrounded by epidermal tissue referred to as a hair follicle. So epidermal tissue and dermal tissue make up the hair follicle that surrounds the hair root. As you go deeper into the dermis, the hair follicle gets wider, and that is referred to as the hair bulb. And then you also have nerve fibers associated with the hair follicle. These nerve fibers are called the hair follicle receptors. They are what detects when your hair has been touched and moved. Also associated with hair follicles is a smooth muscle tissue structure called the erector pili muscle. The erector pili muscle, a smooth muscle tissue structure. There's one per hair follicle, and when it contracts, it causes goosebumps. So erector pili muscles are what causes goosebumps. When we look at a cross section of a hair root, we see at its base is some keratinocytes called the hair matrix. Hair matrix, the keratinocytes that are dividing, producing new cells that get pushed up, that push the cells above them up and up and up, and so forth. Also found in the hair matrix is the melanocytes. So these are the cells, these melanocytes, that put pigments into the keratinocytes, giving our hair the color that it possesses. Also found at the base of the hair follicle is blood vessels. Blood vessels needed to provide nutrients to keep the hair matrix cells alive. There are two main kinds of cells. There are two main kinds of hair. There's the vellus. Vellus hair is what's found on most of our body. Nice, fine, short hairs on the arms and legs and so forth. And then there's the terminal hairs. Terminal hairs are, or at least can be, much longer, and they are coarser hairs found on, on the scalp and growing in other places on the body after puberty. Moving on to the sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands are the oil glands. Sebaceous glands are always associated with hair follicles. So sebaceous glands always associated with hair follicles. So for instance, in this tissue slide here, we can see the sebaceous gland, and there is the hair follicle sebaceous gland associated with it. Sebaceous glands produce an oily secretion called sebum. This oily secretion is important. It helps to soften and lubricate the skin and hair, keeping it supple. And it also helps to slow down the loss of water. We're always losing water from our skin. This helps to slow it down. Sebaceous glands are inactive in children and become active during puberty. So where are there no sebaceous glands? There are no sebaceous glands in thick skin because it does not have hair. Acne. Acne is caused by plugged sebaceous glands. So this can be caused by the sebum, the secretion of the sebaceous glands, plugging it up. This can lead to blackheads or whiteheads. Blackheads are a little smaller and so allows for dirt to collect in the hair follicle. Whiteheads are slightly inflamed and push out a bit, preventing dirt from collecting within it. Then you have pustules. This is when the blockage leads to pus filling in that area, filling into the follicle. And if this can get even larger and are referred to as nodules, these are deeper structures that can actually damage the hair follicle and lead to scarring. And then you can get this huge structure referred to as a cyst. Cysts are large nodules that have connective tissue forming around it to try to isolate the infection, because when you have whiteheads, pustules, nodules, and cysts, there is a bacterial infection of some kind leading to the inflammation. Sweat glands. There are two main kinds of sweat glands. You have the eccrine glands. The eccrine glands are the most common kind found in pretty much all the skin, and they produce sweat. So eccrine glands produce sweat, which is 99% water, has some electrolytes in it. Sweat's important because when it is produced, as the water evaporates, that'll pull heat away from the body, cooling the body. And again, you can find eccrine glands everywhere, especially in thick skin. The second kind of sweat gland is apocrine glands. Apocrine glands are relatively few. They are found in areas where you produce secondary pubic hair and axillary or armpit hair. So the hair that develops during and stays around after puberty. There's an eccrine gland associated with those kinds of hairs. The eccrine gland produces a viscous protein-rich secretion, and this secretion is a food source for bacteria. especially a kind of bacteria that produces an unpleasant odor that we know as body odor. Burns. Well, it turns out sometimes we damage our skin from burns from heat sources of some kind. And there are three main degrees or types of burns. There are first-degree burns. First-degree burns are where only the epidermis is damaged. It can be caused by sunburns. It can be caused by touching something hot, but only very briefly. Again, first-degree burns only damage the epidermis. Second-degree burns. Second-degree burns damage both the epidermis and the dermis. It goes through the epidermis into the dermis. Second-degree burns can be very red. Second-degree burns can lead to blistering as the epidermis separates from the dermis and fills with fluid. And then finally, we have third-degree burns. Third-degree burns damage the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. So third-degree burns go all the way through the skin and into the hypodermis. Third-degree burns can be difficult to heal, can be very serious, can lead to charring and blisters and reddening. And it is also possible for third-degree burns to lead to permanent nerve damage, so that even if the skin heals, you may have numbness in that area. And that is it for this lecture.